This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review. What I'm looking at today is 2016 Tonight She Comes, and this movie surprised me a lot because it's really awesome. And keep in mind something, as someone who likes and appreciates horror movies, I tend to look wherever I can to find good ones. And since I've discovered ToMeTV.com, there have been tons of horror movies, many of which I've never heard of, and I've been sampling them to try to find the pick of the crop, if you will. And what's the case in horror is the case with every other movie. Namely, bigger productions will look better. That's not to say they're better movies in and of themselves, but they will look better. That's because you can pay money for better cameras, better production equipment, and so on and so forth, and better special effects. That's always worth mentioning. But in any case, that doesn't make independent, smaller production budgeted films bad. And that's something I have to remind myself of constantly, because sometimes I'll start watching a movie and get caught up in how it doesn't look quite cinematic as what I'm accustomed to. As I said, there are reasons for that to be the case. I know it, but if it's not something I put at the front of my mind, I tend to forget it. So I'll be watching some lower budgeted production and immediately be turned off because it doesn't quite fit the mold I'm accustomed to seeing. So let's talk about Tonight She Comes. This movie, as I said, is remarkable. And at first, I almost fell into the trap that I mentioned earlier. Namely, it didn't look quite professional enough. The acting seemed slightly off, and so on. But I stuck with it, and I am so happy I did, because as I keep repeating, this movie is awesome. About a third of the way in, you realize that the director was very much inspired by It Follows, which came 2 years prior. But the thing is, what makes Tonight She Comes so interesting is that while it may start essentially as a homage, if you will, to It Follows, it changes drastically. I mean, in a good way, to, in my eyes, a sequel to The Evil Dead. And I know what you're probably thinking, that it perhaps copies Evil Dead, and it doesn't. In fact, the story is not very similar at all. But the thing is, the passion that goes into it, the FX, the goriness is very much in that vein. In fact, I would argue this is a better sequel to the original Evil Dead than Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, or the remake of Evil Dead, because it takes similar concepts into an entirely different and interesting direction. And this movie is just fun. And when I say it's one of the gorier things I've seen, I am not kidding. But the thing is, it's gory in interesting ways. Icky ways, to be sure, but interesting ways that you probably haven't seen too often in movies. And that's what impresses me so much about this. It looks good. It's not quite as cinematic as things I've seen, but it looks good nonetheless. The acting is surprisingly, shockingly good. I don't mean just for an independent horror film. I mean in general. On a surface, at least initially, you're going to think some of these performances aren't very good. But that's okay, just stick with it. The movie works. The acting is actually really good. In fact, it feels like the director wanted you to think that the actors weren't very good because they can act their asses off. This movie is repulsive in a good way. It is one of the better horror movies I've seen this year. And it goes without saying, you probably have not heard of it. So check out Tonight She Comes. As I said, it starts off very much, and I should mention that there's serious female nudity in Tonight She Comes. I mean full Monty nudity. One of the many things I find fascinating about this movie is that while initially that was pretty shocking to me, after a point I didn't care. It didn't matter at all that this woman was walking around nude because the story was so well told and so graphic, and again, in ways you do not see often. Thank God, it is gross. But nonetheless, it is a great movie, and it is not a sequel to either its following or any of the Evil Dead movies. But it does what a good sequel should do, which is broaden what came before it and introduce new concepts. It reminds me in some ways of Exorcist II, The Heretic. I know, the movie has the worst reputation, but it's a fascinating movie. If you haven't seen it, check out both Tonight She Comes and Exorcist II, The Heretic, because in reference to the latter, it tries to do things that the original did not do. I'm not saying it was successful in doing it. It probably wasn't, but it tried. It wasn't the same old, same old. And with Tonight She Comes, the director does things that I have not seen. It is pretty impressive and a great movie and a hidden gem. This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review. Have you seen Tonight She Comes? Do you agree? Disagree? Let me know down below. Peace.